Okay, great. And hopefully you can see the title screen now, if you wouldn't mind confirming.
So the same white screen. Okay, we should try
that.
And we just made a different change. Hopefully now you can see it. Thank you for your help. If you could let us know if you can see the title slide now, that'd be great. Okay,
excellent.
It looks like yes.
Okay, success. Thank you so much for bearing with us.
Thank you. So welcome everyone to the online webinar on incorporating caregiver learning techniques into your KP&L group. I'm Kim. I'm a family engagement specialist on the KP&L team at Child Care Resources, and with me is Jennifer Duval. She is the KP&L lead. And today we are very happy to have two guest speakers with us. They are Tanya Campbell and Chelsea Bruner of Evergreen Elementary in Oregon. And Tanya is a facilitator and Chelsea is a dual facilitator and parent as well. And so they have kindly joined us today to talk a little bit about what they have been doing in terms of caregiver learning in their KP&L group, and they'll be leading that conversation towards the end. All right, so to start off, we're going to talk a little bit today about our objectives. Just to kind of set the tone of what the goal of this webinar will be. And so the three things that we're really looking at today are to provide a space to talk about useful tips and ways to include caregiver learning into your KP&L group, provide some time to discuss and brainstorm new ideas and among one another, and also to talk about materials and resources that are available for your use. And a little bit about why this is an important topic. Caregiver learning is a main component of Kaleidoscope, and the knowledge and child development and in school readiness that caregivers obtain during KP&L is really pivotal in promoting the success of children in school and in their lives. We also really want to continue to empower caregivers to be the first teachers of the child that they care for. We also want to note that during a survey that we administered a while back, facilitators noted that this was a topic that they wanted more support in and that they found quite challenging. So as a result, we've made this webinar today to help all of you. So before we really dig into specific ways on how to integrate caregiver learning, we want to take a moment to ask this question. And the goal of the question is really to help us understand what we're looking for, how to recognize caregiver learning, and also understand what the goal is. The question is, what does successful caregiver learning in the KP&L context look like to you, as a facilitator? And just take a moment to think about this. And when you're ready, feel free to respond in the chat box. Or if you want to speak, we can unmute you and you can talk to the group as well. And if it helps, you can think about your most recent KP&L group and maybe what you observed. So we don't have any comments yet. I'll give it another moment if people would like to share. I can start with an example. When I think about this question specifically, based on my visits to different KP&L groups, I can tell when there's been successful caregiver learning, when I see that caregivers are engaged and asking questions. That's usually a big indication. Other examples might be when a caregiver comes in and they communicate to the facilitator that they're trying new things at home to teach their child, like singing during bath time or talking about colors at the grocery store. It looks like that Tanya has made a comment about modeling and ongoing conversations and feedback and knowing what they want to learn, which are great examples. We'll talk a little bit about modeling later on. And also the system of feedback as well, continually asking caregivers what they want to learn. Is there anyone else that might want to share?
And again, if you'd like to be unmuted and be able to speak to the group, then just type that into the chat box or raise your hand if you have that on your panel, and we can unmute you so that you can provide answers that way if that's easier.
All right. The next question we have for you is to think about the other perspective on the flip side and think about what do you think caregiver learning means to a caregiver specifically. And again, think about this question a little bit and feel free to respond via chat box or raise your hand so we can mute you. Looks like Janet is going to speak a little bit about this question.
And Janet, it looks like you're self-muted, so if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, we'd love to have your suggestions.
If you're trying to unmute yourself, I think there should be a little microphone icon that you can unclick or click, and then it'll unmute you. If it's not working, Janet, feel free to type into the message box too. It looks like Tanya has another great comment. She says, knowing how to support their children at home in all realms of development and kindergarten readiness. Exactly. That's a great comment. And some other examples that we have also is that I think that it depends on the caregiver themselves. Caregiver learning may be different for a new dad who has a newborn son and is navigating parenthood for the first time. And then also may be different for a grandma who is relearning how to raise a child because it's been a long time for her. So it's really going to be dependent on the person. Does anyone have any other answers to this question that they want to share with the group? Okay. So I just tried a couple more things of what I think of when I think of this question is, I think caregiver learning can also mean someone fulfilling their role in caring for their child and also trying and understanding new ways of teaching them as well. All right, so now that we've talked a little bit about what caregiver learning is and different points of view, we want to dig in a little bit about what roles there are, and that includes the facilitator role and the caregiver role. So for the facilitator role, we want to emphasize that as the facilitator, you really are the point of contact for caregivers to go to learn about child development and school readiness. And a large part of that is because KP&L is not just for the children, it's for both children and caregivers at the same time. And as your group develops and attendance increases over time, we'd like to remind you that it is really important to inform new participants that caregiver learning is a KP&L goal, and also to continue to remind your regular attendees that this is something that you're trying to achieve as well. As for the caregiver role, on the caregiver side, it's really up to them to be willing to learn and to be engaged and to be curious about ways to teach their child that they're caring for. And it's also important to know that caregivers learn from one another, and that is a large role that they have. It's the facilitator's responsibility to create an environment for that and provide opportunities. And another way to think about this is that caregivers can help lead or co-lead activities with the facilitator to help foster all of this. So some examples of this would be caregivers leading songs or story time, recipes for a healthy snack, or leading a special activity to teach other adults in the group. And we realize that this can be challenging sometimes because sometimes adults are a bit more shy or hesitant to do this, but it's always good to think about starting small and building up, building relationships with them, and delegating a task, maybe like cleaning up or setting up an activity. And over time, as they become more comfortable, expanding those duties and encouraging them to be more involved and to participate more often. And this will happen naturally as we get to know the adults better over time. So we'll go into a little bit more detail about techniques you can use in your group. Before I continue, are there any questions so far? And we want you to feel comfortable about having a conversation. So if you ever have a question, just feel free to chime in and we can respond to that. Looks like we do have a question. And see if I can scroll through this. Do you know how to?
I don't.
Okay, so let's see if I can read it. So we have a question that says, it's a caregiver learning comment. The mom kept saying no to throwing a child who was, she kept saying no to a child who was throwing a puzzle piece. So you took the container and said to the child, here, put the puzzle piece in it. The next time you tried to throw the puzzle, the mom took the container and said he should go into timeout. It was just amazing to see how she caught on to that. And it was a quick strategy. Okay, yeah, so that's a good example. I can't see who put in this comment, but thank you. But it really shows how when caregivers are attentive to their child during their group, they can behave and communicate with their child in ways that they see that the facilitator is modeling, for example. All right, so we have, looks like
Somebody has their hand raised.
someone has their hand raised, and let's see who it is. Janet again. And Janet, are you unable to mute yourself because it looks like, oh no, you're now unmuted. Go ahead and ask a question, please. Janet, can you hear us?
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, Janet. Yes, we can hear you. Thank you for your question.
Oh, okay. Having a little technical problem here. So that was not a question. I raised my hand because I wanted to make that comment
Okay, yes.
about the how do I see caregiver learning in my setting? And I was given an example of how one child kept throwing the puzzle pieces, and every time he would throw it, his mom would say, "No throwing, no throwing." So then I noticed, and I went over, and the next time he was throwing, and I handed out the container. So he started putting the puzzle pieces in the container, and then I left them. And when and then he tried again to throw it, and mom picked up the the container. Instead of saying no throwing, I didn't tell her not to say no throwing to him, but to give him something to do or tell him what to do. But she just picked it up and then just modeled the same thing that I did the first time. So, and the kid responded to her. So it was just amazing to see that. That was just my point on how I see the caregiver learning example.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. We had some trouble viewing the comment on the screen, so that was a good clarification. But yes, that's a perfect example of modeling and the caregiver learning how to communicate with her child. It's actually a perfect segue into the next section where we'll be talking about modeling. And Janet, did you want to add anything else? Because I'll need to mute you again if that's okay for the rest of the presentation.
No, go ahead, mute me.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is a timeline or outline really of the next chunk of the webinar and what we'll be going over. And just like Janet had read up, we'll be talking about modeling. We'll also be talking about coaching and guiding, setting the stage for conversation among participants, providing written info, setting up presentations, and referring to other community resources, as all very effective ways to implement caregiver learning into your group. So just as Janet was talking about, modeling is a great way to use caregiver learning. And by modeling, I think I'll give a brief definition of it, of why I think it can be defined as, is when the facilitator exhibits a behavior or communication and the caregiver sees that as an example of what they can do as well. And this is really done informally and formally. I think that a lot of facilitators do it without knowing throughout their KP&L group. It can be done very naturally and casually throughout the group. And an example of this would be, for instance, one time I was in a group and the caregiver was sitting down with their daughter and they're playing Play-Doh, and the facilitator came up and decided that this would be a good teaching moment in an informal way to talk about parallel talk, which is a method to describe what the child is doing to promote healthy language development. So the facilitator came up and told the child that she was doing a great job rolling out the dough and cutting the dough into shapes. And she said, "Oh, I see that you're changing the dough and cutting it into shapes, into triangles, and cutting 3 sides and so on." And this kind of talk really helps with language development. And then later on, ideally, the caregiver would pick up on this modeling and also use that same type of communication. And that's just one example. There are many different ways. If you have any other examples, please feel free to chime in as well. While modeling can be done informally, it can also be done formally. If you feel like having a more structured lesson, you can definitely do that. And that could be done during circle time with the caregivers. So I'm using the same example I just gave with parallel talk. You could have a lesson during group time and let the caregivers know that for that day there is a specific technique, communication technique that you want to teach them. And you can use that circle time to model that and teach them how to do that with their kids. Also thinking about activities and when to do modeling. Modeling can be done one-on-one during the child-directed playtime, or it could be done in a larger setting during an activity. And try doing both and see what you like best and what fits with your group best. You're the expert of your KP&L group, and you can do whatever best fits people's needs. And related to modeling is coaching and guiding, and your ability to help caregivers learn how to care for their child. And to give an example of this, we have this photo here of a facilitator talking to a dad. And what had happened on this day is that dad had to come into the KP&L group, and he was new with his daughter and didn't know anyone, didn't really know what KP&L was or how it was organized, and he didn't quite know what to do. So he sat down kind of off to the side, and his daughter was playing. And the facilitator saw this as a coaching and guiding moment. And so she came up to him and introduced herself, and they exchanged names. And she explained to him what KP&L was, how it was structured, what the goal was, what the plan was for the day. And she encouraged him to play with his daughter and engage with them, because children learn through play. And this was his first interaction with the group, and hopefully after this, having such positive chatting with the facilitator, he came again and again. So this shows how really facilitators can have a huge impact on guiding caregivers to where they need to be and understanding about KP&L. And I want to emphasize also that when you have new attendees in the group, be sure to take time to really get to know the new caregiver and child, because that first point of contact will be really significant in determining whether or not they will be coming again and again in the future as well. All right, and here are some examples, just more tangible ways you can help guide caregivers into caregiver learning. And here we have some posters that facilitators put up showing how caregivers recognize when their child is learning new things. So some nice examples of very simple and handwritten ways to do this. And setting the stage for conversations among participants. So as we had mentioned before, caregivers learn from one another, and the facilitator is able to foster this environment. And this can be done through different ways. I've seen a lot of different groups do potlucks every month or every season, or each group they have a snack. And though you may not immediately see like how this is helpful, but it actually is like gathering people in a big group over food or around a table helps exchange conversation and ideas. Also making introductions. There was one story I heard from the field once when a facilitator, she found out that there are two moms in her group who are from London, I think, but they didn't know each other yet. And so she introduced them to one another. So making the small attempts to connect adults in the group so that they can meet and essentially become friends helps caregiver learning as well. And then here are some more pictures of more tangible things you can do. We have a list of caregivers and kids and what schools are enrolled in for kindergarten, as well as names and ages. And this can help spark conversations among people in your group if you're looking for more ways to do that. And a little bit more information about different ways you can set the stage for conversations among participants. Again, you're the expert of your group, so definitely implement whatever you think is best. But really invite them to share about what they're learning about child development and school readiness, one-on-one, informally, or more formally in a big group during circle time. You can ask them verbally or also in written format. And next, Jennifer is going to talk a little bit about providing written info.
Great, thank you, Kim. And then while we switch here, just please let me know if you have any questions or ideas that you're dying to share before we move on to this next section, because we know that you all are experts at doing this and you probably have lots of examples, so we'd be happy to hear any of them or to answer any questions that you might have at this point. Okay, then we will go ahead and move on. Again, feel free to chime in if you choose to. Love to hear from you, and we'll have a chance to have some more back and forth interaction in a little bit. Oh, looks like we do have one hand raised. Oh, okay, so we got that one covered. So another way to provide some of the caregiver learning pieces is by providing written info. And we saw a few examples of this in a large scale for the group by using just large poster board paper or whatever works for you to post things in the room so that all the caregivers can see. But there are a couple other ways too. For instance, you could create a resource area. And sometimes this might look like a binder that has lots of different local resources. Sometimes I have heard some facilitators have like an accordion folder type thing, and they've got tabs on it to talk about what all the different resources are. And they mention it periodically to the families that are coming to the group so that they know, oh, if you are looking for any information on local food banks or the local children's museum or things to do on a rainy day, or they have all kinds of resources in these binders, and if they're left in a place that families know where to find them, then they can just access them whenever they like, and that is also encouraging caregiver learning. And then also using some of the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn materials, and we have many of those, which we'll go into in a little bit more detail, but all of those materials are on your flash drives, and you are free to print them off, make copies. You can have them blown up into poster size, you can laminate them, put signs up around in different areas. But these are a great way to boost some of that caregiver learning, and sometimes just to let caregivers know that it is, what they're doing is really benefiting their child's development. It's not, it's not just play, because we all know that children learn through play, and that's one of the main messages that we want to get to caregivers. So some of the materials that I mentioned that are on your flash drive, and if ever you have trouble accessing any of those, please do get in touch with us at Child Care Resources. We are happy to provide you with copies of things, of these materials. But there's the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn posters, Help Me Learn and Help Me Share, which offer some great tips for families that are coming to your group. There's the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn display cards, What I Learn and Help Me Learn. And these are great to post around your different activity areas so that it really talks about, you know, what children are learning when they play with the dress up stuff, or when they're building with blocks, or when they're getting messy with the sensory table. So having some of these display cards available in the room is a great way to remind caregivers what their children are getting out of these activities. And then, of course, we have all of the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn lesson guides, 48 different lesson guides that can help guide you in, you know, what topics you want to focus on when you are leading your group. And as you all know, these are not required. It's not a set curriculum, but they're there as a resource for you if ever you are looking to get, to shape a group activity and have some things that you can build off of for circle time or for the different individual child-directed activities. And then there's also a Kaleidoscope Play and Learn Pinterest board, which we hadn't been all that active on, but Kim has been great at pinning different things that we come across. And we always love to get examples from all of you. If you take pictures and want to send them our way, or if you want to direct us to websites or other Pinterest items, we're happy to add those because it's just one more way of for getting resources out to all the facilitators to get some ideas of things that families can do at home to promote their child's learning, of different do-it-yourself activities. There's lots of different ideas on there. So please do share ideas that you might come across. And then this is one example from a group in King County that we visited that, you know, at circle time, they were reading a book, but behind the facilitators, there, you know, is a large whiteboard. And they had made a list about some of the things that they were working on with the families that were participating in the group. And by the activities that they had chosen to put out and the story that they were reading and what they were talking about with all of the participants, they were getting at these different items like learning the letters in your child's name, print out letters and words when reading, point out, learning that every letter has a sound, becoming familiar with letters. So they were talking about all of the skills that the children were learning, but by writing them up on a board like that, it's increasing caregiver learning because it's really letting the caregivers know what these activities are doing, kind of the behind the scenes of how helpful this is, and then giving them a few tips of things to try when they're home or when they're in the group to boost their child's learning. And then, as I said, we do have lots of different ideas in the caregiver lesson guides. This is just one example, the What's in a Name. And this was at a group also in King County. This was at White Center, where the facilitator had put up this poster and could, you know, really, caregivers could, she never mentioned it during the group, but caregivers could see it and get some, you know, information about different things that they can do to, you know, increase their child's familiarity with their name and make them feel good about their name. It's talking about them, you know, starting to develop their sense of self and identity, and just kind of some little tips and notes about what's in a name. And it was a really simple thing that was pulled from the lesson guide and just used as an example. Again, just a piece of poster paper that's taped up on the wall or here on the window. And doing something as simple as that is considered caregiver learning. And another thing that you can do, and that has, you know, we've heard great positive responses from people in the community about, are when you as facilitator invite in an outside presenter there might be somebody from the community, like a dentist or a doctor or a firefighter, a librarian, veterinarian, but you could bring someone in. Here we have the Tooth Fairy, who came from a local children's dental practice. This was at a group with an affiliate of ours in North North Carolina. And of course, all the children loved having the tooth fairy come in and talk about the importance of brushing teeth, and then having oversized brushes for the children to practice. And oftentimes dentists will come in and will hand out little kits of toothbrushes and toothpaste and dental floss. And these are great for the kids, but also the adults that are participating get more information about community resources. And they might have a chance to ask questions of the community members. They might be a specialist in something like, dental care, or a librarian. And it's a great way that the adults in the room have access to some of these specialists and can get some of their questions answered and get some goodies. And this is something that really comes about often through that emergent curriculum approach of figuring out what your participants are interested in. So just hearing what they're talking about, hearing if they're asking, each other about, I don't know what to do about my child sleeping at night, or, different issues that might be of importance and concern to them, that might clue you in on who might be a good guest speaker to come in. And you can also ask the caregivers if they have specific ideas or if they want to organize something like this. This is a great way to increase caregiver leadership and let them become really involved if they want to go ahead and organize a special presentation from someone in the community. That's a great idea. And again, thinking about community resources, like having the resource binder, and using this, their Kaleidoscope groups as a space to connect with and learn about other services. So they're going to learn, a lot about their child's development, but they might also learn a lot about what else is available in the community and what other programs they might want to get involved in. And, this is something that as facilitators that you can provide, but it's also the caregivers talking to each other. And so you opening up that space so that it's a great opportunity for some of this shared knowledge on community resources. And kind of related to the emergent curriculum, again, this idea of getting feedback from the participants in your group, because every group is so different. And so what is of interest to one group may not be, so fascinating to another group. So it's really dependent on what your participants are curious about. So it's a great idea to have some sort of system for gathering that feedback, to find out kind of what they like, what they're interested in, what they have questions about. And the emergent curriculum is, again, this is a way of like really figuring out what's of interest, building upon it, following up with it. So this can be something that, if you hear some caregivers talking about something and then you plan either a lesson or a special presentation on it, and then you can build on it the next week, and then always kind of following up to ask like, oh, did that meet your needs? Did that, are you still curious about this? Is there anything else that we could do differently? To really check back in and make sure that it is meeting their needs. But your group will be most successful if you are, following the lead of the caregivers and participants that are in there on what they're interested in. So for caregiver learning planning, these are some of the things that that we think are helpful if this is something that you are wanting to really emphasize and that you want to do some pre-planning around. We mentioned the lesson guides that you all have on, on your flash drive. And then most of the facilitators that we work with say that they're always, looking for resources in the community and bringing them in and kind of have a stack of things that they can share with caregivers. So that's another great way. You can consider structuring some of your groups by week, month, season, etc. Just to add a little structure if that's helpful for you, and to have some known expectations for the facilitators. That way you could use themes for different months or different seasons. You can also talk to the caregivers and the participants and see, if there's something special that they want to have, built upon week after week, and come up with some sort of schedule or structure with them. And it's important to make that known to the participants. So having just your daily schedule so that folks know when they come in kind of what the routine is really helpful. And having that discussion with the caregivers about how important routine is for children is great. And then, you're modeling it by having that group routine schedule put up in your room. Again, making resources available, and then knowing that, you know, all of the planning that you can do, that it's wonderful, and it definitely, it's great to go into your group feeling like you have an idea of what you want to cover, you have resources to back it up, you have all the materials you need, but being able to kind of go with the flow and see what the participants are into on any given day will really make things easier and more pleasant for you. So being flexible and able to adapt as you go. And these are just some visuals of some of the different resources and materials that are available through Kaleidoscope Play and Learn. And, you know, we've got the posters and the cards. We do have still some activity cards in stock, and that's something that we're wondering if facilitators are still interested in those. So if you do want to let us know if you use these activity cards and hand them out to families or just have them available in your groups, please do let us know, because we want to be creating materials that are useful for you all in your weekly groups. And just a few tips as we move on about some of the things to think about when doing, you know, planning for your caregiver learning piece. We talked about the idea of choosing a theme, and this could be, you know, taken from a lesson guide. So for example, if you were going to have the theme of learning about shapes, you could have on a poster board or in different pieces of paper or index cards or whatever works for you around the room and space that you're in, some tips for caregivers about how to teach shapes to children. And they can be very, very simple, just some, you know, a little sentence on a card, or it can be some examples of things that they might say, so just some quotes of things that they might say to talk about shapes to a child. You could read a book about shapes at circle time, have various age-appropriate shape activities available, and certainly put the caregivers to work in helping with the different stations and coordinating some of these activities. And then again, modeling and for the caregivers on how to teach shapes when interacting with kids. So this can be just a simple sentence that you are saying to a child that one, you know, caregiver might hear and click in that is really teaching about shapes. And so by modeling it, hopefully they're going to be doing it more often with their children at home. And again, providing resources. So there are some extended handouts to some of the lesson guides, and having a stack of those on hand for families to take home so that they can kind of build upon what they learned in their Kaleidoscope group and try out some of the activities at home. And connect the theme of shapes to school readiness, just pointing out how useful this is for children who'll be going into kindergarten. And then, as I mentioned before, following up. So the next week, maybe asking, did you get a chance to teach shapes while doing everyday activities? How did you do that? You could ask for folks to call out at circle time some of the things that they did. Just getting a conversation going, or always one-on-one as well as facilitator. When you're moving around the room and connecting with families, you can ask some of those questions to follow up as well. And as you're planning this, great to really think about what is going to be of interest to the caregivers in your group. So the best way to do that is just to ask them what they're curious about. And you can do this in lots of different ways. You can just, you know, one-on-one ask them. It can be a circle time activity of asking, you know, people to just shout out some of their ideas. We've heard that some facilitators like to have just a suggestions box, and they've got, you know, little slips of paper and a pencil, and families, whenever they feel like it, they can go ahead and write some ideas or questions or suggestions and drop them in the box, or to just have a big piece of poster paper up, and families can feel free to go ahead and write, you know, on the poster board, and then you would, you know, follow up on that and figure out your plan from some of their ideas. So you all probably have other ideas for some of this. If you do want to go ahead and chime in with any of those, please either raise your hand to be unmuted or go ahead and type it in the chat box. And we'll get to those. And we are going to turn it over now to our guest speakers. And we're excited to hear some of the suggestions that they have on incorporating caregiver learning. So Tanya and Chelsea, I'm going to go ahead and unmute both of you so that you can go ahead. And if you want to let us know when you need the slide, if you need the slide changed, just go ahead and let us know, and we'll go ahead, we'll take care of that.
Alrighty, sounds good. So here at Evergreen, I'm Tanya, and I am the Title I Intervention Specialist. And then my co-partner here, Ms. Chelsea Brunner.
Hi, I'm a co-facilitator and a parent.
And so the union of having both an educator view as well as a parent view, and the merge between the two facilitators has been a very strong asset to our program at Evergreen. And so if at all possible, you can get those into your elementary classrooms out there. I highly encourage that. So, alrighty, we're ready to move forward.
All right.
So here's an example of in our playroom. As we come together, we open up with centers, and then we give the kids kind of 15 minutes to just have some open free play time as they're coming in and joining us for the day. And then we come to the carpet, and which we call our meeting place. And this is just one example of really providing parents with the information and in the modeling of routine and structure, and how much children need that, especially in that kindergarten readiness, realm. And so we open up with, going over our lesson focus and what the focus pertains to, and with the child development. And then we always open up communications with our parents, with the children, giving them time to talk, ask questions in regards to the lesson focus. And again, those are coming off our lesson guides. Alrighty, next. And so here's just an example, and some of this might be kind of repeat of what we saw earlier in the slides, but again, we take from our lesson guides the key messages, and we put them onto chart paper, as well as we like to do the visual cues and stuff. And so on the blue bulletin board there, you can kind of see we've taken it in the highlights of that lesson and just put them on the index cards along with some picture cues. And so we introduce those. And
all these things that you see in the picture are behind us as myself and Tanya are speaking to the children and the parents. So every day when we come, we sing a song, and during that time, most of the parents don't sing, but most of them are reading what the lesson plan's about, the different things that we don't necessarily highlight verbally, but gives them a chance to read it while we're interacting with the kids.
A lot of times too, when it's kind of open-ended free play time, the parents will get up and kind of meander around and read any of the lesson points that we've posted. So gives them just a little bit of more information, and sometimes it even helps to extend those conversations. And if they've got a question about it, they're really good to coming to us. But then it also, like you guys had mentioned earlier, it gives them the opportunity to talk amongst themselves as caregivers and sharing examples of how they've experienced one of those situations as far as whatever the lesson topic is. Alrighty, next one. Okay, and one key component, I work very closely with our kindergarten team, and one of the ways that we really feel important is targeting expected positive behavior. And so, I use the language a lot of here at school, this is how we, and then state the behavior. And so everything is very direct in a positive mode, in positive redirection, stating the behavior that's expected, stating the positive behavior that's the child is doing. And there have been times that, you know, we've had some little behaviors amongst our students and children and their parents, and there's that fine line of, that's their child, we're the facilitators, and when can we come in, because we don't want to override or belittle a caregiver at any point. And so there's been a time where Chelsea and I have had to just kind of gently step into the situation and you know, take the child and say, you know, at school we da 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 da, and let me see. And I think in most cases they turn it around and good job. And
the parents usually are in a situation where they might not know how to react or how to deal with the situation, and they ask us, well, what would you guys do? And so that's kind of a learning moment for them too. So the next one.
Yeah, and at any time, this is kind of new as far as Chelsea and I goes, is on a webinar, you know, so anytime anybody's got a question, and, you know, do your thing there, type it in, and the gals can stop us. And so we create our playroom into different centers, and it is all themed to the daily lessons. And so we have the book nook, the imagination station, our 2 stations that we have, and provide, you know, we provide the caregivers the importance of everyday reading and playing with their children. As we kind of talked earlier, using that specific language to build vocabulary development, in the importance of letting them get down, explore, building their imaginations, you know, and then bringing in the developmental reins of what they're actually learning and building for kinder readiness in that moment.
On the next slide. So these are just 2 more examples of part of our centers. We encourage using everyday items, so the parents and the caregivers that come to our group don't feel that they can't afford what we're using here. So in the one picture, it was all about music, and we had actual instruments that the school loaned us. And then we also had coffee cans and sticks and plastic eggs filled with rice, so the kids could get a moment to use something that they could also make at home and something that they might not necessarily have access to at home. And the other picture was a simple piece of blue fabric that we had some rubber fish and reptiles, and it's an open-ended activity that mimics a pond, and the kids, it was all things that the kids could make at home with their parents and their caregivers. So it gives them a chance to realize that they don't need some of those fancier toys.
And a lot of times, every opportunity that we have to collect, you know, materials so that they could build these during playtime and take home, that's a huge success. And especially kind of those ahas of, I didn't know I could do that with rice and beans, kind of a thing. And so it's pretty exciting for the children, but then very rewarding as for the parents of going, okay, I could do this. I have access, and that's a huge thing. Is, you know, here at our school and our community, we're a pretty impoverished community, and so for them to have access to materials is somewhat limited, and so it's really important to just highlight the things that they have, common items in the household to use. Alrighty, next one. We came across this quote and it just kind of stuck with us. It's not about what it is, but it's what it becomes. And it does take a little bit of time, but as the caregivers and the children come to know each other, that interaction from one child with a different parent to parent caregiver is just amazing. And there is in one of these settings, Chelsea and I just kind of sat back in awe of how much communication was going in the sharing. And the one little girl you can see there on the left, she's talking to a caregiver, not of her parent. And she had a big story to tell, and she was explaining herself. And it's just amazing that we kind of felt on that day that we could have literally walked on the room and that session could have just lent itself to the caregiver. So it does come.
So the next slide. This is kind of what we touched on a few minutes ago, the examples of using everyday items in lieu of specialty school manipulatives. As you can see in the, yeah, perfect. Thank you. So this is what we have at our school. We have a resource center where there's take-home activities that we post flyers for things that parents and caregivers can participate in. We have our schedule. We have our comment suggestion box. We have where they check in. This is kind of their home base for when they start our play group every day. And then the picture on the right was our last day in May last year, and we took a group photo, and we had a kind of a fun day where we made sure that everybody has a takeaway. That's something that we chose to really hold on to, was that every group there was some sort of takeaway, whether it be a book or something that they made that day that really stuck with the parents in our location. So that day they went home with a few different books. They went home with some learning tools to get them ready for kindergarten and the next year.
And next one. And so this is just a few testimonials that we've had from our caregivers. And I think if we're pushed for time, you guys can read them. Yeah, maybe come back and read them on their own later on. And so, but it does testify the need for KP&L, the want of it in any community. And so if you build it, they will come.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you. And really, we had reached out to Tanya and Chelsea because we've heard from multiple people who've observed in their groups what an amazing job they do, particularly around the caregiver learning. So even being in an elementary school setting, it doesn't feel like a preschool classroom because it's really about the caregivers as well. So it's wonderful to have some of their really concrete examples. And thank you again for participating.
You're welcome.
And thank you for sharing all those photos as well. I think it's really good to be able to visualize what exactly you're doing. And are there any questions for Tanya or Chelsea? If you do have any, feel free to ask them now and we can get those answered. If not, that's okay. Okay, so it looks like we'll move on. If you think of something later on, feel free to chime in. So after hearing about Tanya and Chelsea's group and everything we talked about before, we want to take some time to have some conversation about the methods we talked about, including types of caregiver learning techniques and how many of these have you all have used in your group, or maybe you've used other ones that we haven't talked about yet. It'd be a really good time to share these ideas among one another, so facilitators can learn about new and different ways they can support caregiver learning. So if you want to raise your hand or type in the chat box, now is the time to do it. Looks like we might have hand raised.
Oh, great. It looks like Tanya was giving her contact information. So if folks did have questions, we can share that out. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. And we can maybe email that out later at the end when we send the recording of the webinar, so people can email you, Tanya, if they have any follow-up questions.
That's great. Thank you. So are there any other methods that are kind of a go-to for you as facilitators when you're thinking about ways that you incorporate caregiver learning that we didn't cover, so that we can be sure to share those amongst all of the participants?
And if not, we can move on to the next question. And we're curious about, is there any specific method that you use that works really well and brings a lot of success that we haven't talked about, or maybe something that you find challenging about the caregiver learning component? It looks like we have a comment from Tanya. She says, we had families do home videos and share them during playgroup. Oh, so videos on how to do a specific activity maybe. That is a great idea in getting families involved in the group, and also a very fun project, I would imagine, being able to view those videos. I don't think I've seen groups do that before. So that's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. Any others? Adding on to if there are any challenges. Oh, it looks like Fran has a question. Okay, Fran, I'm gonna unmute you and feel free to ask your question. Go ahead, Fran. Hello? Fran, if you can hear us, we can't hear you.
Maybe she typed it in the questions panel.
I was gonna say we typed it.
Or question.
Oh, okay, Fran doesn't have a microphone. Fran, if you want to type in your question in the chat box, we'd be able to view it then, and we can read your question out loud. We'll give you a moment to type it in.
And as we're waiting for that comment, because Fran often has good ideas, if you could think if there are other kinds of support that would be helpful for you in incorporating caregiver learning. We know that lots of KP&L facilitators come from early education backgrounds and maybe were preschool teachers in the past. And so working with the adults might be something that's a little newer. And so if there are particular challenges you have, or if you feel like there'd be additional support that would be helpful, we would love to hear. So please think about that as well.
It looks like Fran says, wow, you have covered them all. Helping at snack time is the first step. She says that they help them move on to store or art time after that. And yeah, she says, thank you for ideas. I think that is a great comment. I see that usually when caregivers do get involved more in the group, snack time is the first activity that they do, and then as they get more comfortable, they'll move on to the next thing, like leading their own activity as well. And Janet asks, how many days a week do you have your group time? I think that might be directed toward Tanya, perhaps? Yeah,
probably for Tanya and Chelsea.
Tanya, do you know how many groups, how many days a week do you have your group time?
We run Fridays only for 2 hours a day, and honestly, there's a need for more of that, and we're in progress of getting ready to train another parent. And it's really because I have a full-time job, and I am very, very fortunate that my administrator allows me time in my work day to implement KP&L. And so that's the most that I can give myself. And so, you know, that's kind of what we have to offer here. But I know that there's been a huge request to add another day. It's just finding the facilities is a challenge because during the week I have groups in the playroom that we're in, and so it's more of the logistical aspect that becomes a challenge.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, that just finding the space, you know, and then the facilitator time, of course, but often it's tough to even get the space for more than that 2 hours a week.
Yeah, you know, in local communities too, I don't know how it is in other places, but here in our community, in exploring options to host KP&L, we had to provide like a liability insurance, and you know, we don't have that. And so kind of our leg in as me being a district employee, you know, kind of helps with that. And so we just have it on campus here, but that too was a challenge in trying to find a separate setting off campus so that we could extend our play date. Mm-hmm. But that's just not an option for us. And so, right. And we run on the school year, and that's kind of another challenge. Our families would love us to go all summer long. However, I'm a district trainer, and so I spend a lot of my time across the state trainings for, you know, just my regular work. And then we have to have time out of our buildings for just the summer cleanup and such on the custodial level. So, right. Yeah, it's pretty mixed for Kaleidoscope groups across the state and across the country as far as whether they operate on the school year or if they are year-round. And typically those that take place in an elementary school do have to operate just on the school calendar. But there are a lot of groups that do go year-round if they have that capability.
And Tanya, I'm just seeing your comment now in response to what challenges people are having in caregiver learning. And you had mentioned that you have one caregiver that used to bring 3 grandchildren, and now she's began bringing 5, and that she spends a lot of time doing behavior management now, and how it's become less effective with more children that she's bringing, and how you kind of talk to her a little bit about maybe having another adult come with her. That's a really good way, a really good example of how reaching out to a caregiver that may need help and identifying that. Have you been able to talk to her at all yet, or have you made a plan yet on how you can support her in the KP&L group?
Well, I see her after school here quite a bit as she picks up her first grader granddaughter, and I've been kind of trying to just get that talk time with her. And if not, I'll try to meet up with her on Friday. And, you know, it's one of those things, but for kudos to that grandma, because she is one of those that she is the first one to take all of the resources. She's reading everything. She really wants to better herself as a caregiver. She wants to give the very best for her grandchildren. However,
and she is not necessarily, she doesn't have,
her skill set and her skill level is a bit challenged itself, and so that can kind of speak to where the children are developmentally. And so what it has become is just all of a sudden very unstructured, and Chelsea and I having to chase down little children, and it pulls us aside of what we really need to be doing. And so we're going to just gently approach her and try to encourage, adult participation to come in and support her, and just kind of see where it takes us.
Yes, that sounds like a great plan. Thank you for sharing your examples. And we just want to pose another question, if people feel comfortable sharing. If there is any kind of support that would be useful to all you facilitators in caregiver learning, feel free to voice that now. If you prefer to do that later on in person through email or phone with us, that's also a fine option as well. We're very flexible and looking for new resources and ways we can support you. So just let us know what we can do, okay? And one other comment I wanted to make before we start wrapping up is that in the KPNL group, as FFN caregivers do come in and participate in caregiver learning, it is important to keep in mind that when they do go home, often, grandma, auntie, or the neighbor, whoever it may be, is hopefully going to teach the parent what they learned in the KPNL. And so you can see here that there's a transfer of knowledge happening in the community within your KPNL network. And it's good to keep that in mind, that what you impart on the FFN caregivers in the group, it also goes beyond that group as well. And I don't think we have much time to show a video right now, but we can email the link to the video later on when we send out the recording of this webinar, so you can view it. A little bit short on time. And so just to wrap up, we want to thank everyone for joining us, and an extra special thanks to Tanya and Chelsea as well for participating and sharing what they do in their group. And as always, if you have any questions, concerns, feedback, feel free to email us at kpnl@childcare.org. We're always here to help. And we hope that this was useful for you all and that you learned some new tips and ideas. Don't be too worried about writing this all down, because we'll send this all to you. But here are some extra resources you can use that we like, including Vroom, Mind in the Making, Love Talk Play, and Parenting Counts. They have some good links and materials on caregiver learning for birth to 5. And thank you once again, and we hope to talk to you all soon.
Thank you so much. And feel free to reach out if you have other ideas or questions, and carry on with your amazing caregiver learning techniques in your Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups. Thanks so much.